Okay, so we're going to be talking about Borderlands 4 here. We were kind of warned by Gearbox's Andy Pitchford that, there's going to be a lot of stuff addressed in the day one patch, which may explain why we didn't receive the game until the game literally appeared on store shelves. Alex, you have looked at the PC version. We were sent the PlayStation 5 version. We'll buy Xbox and we'll get onto those in due course. But Alex, you spent some of your personal time, no less, checking out Borderlands 4 on PC, which kind of lays the template, sets the expectation for all the other versions, I guess. So where do we begin?
I think we should begin, I would say, with the usual things that I try and flag in a PC version of whether or not this thing stutters, which is a very important question to ask when we are talking about Unreal Engine 5 titles, right? That's been a key thing that everyone's been talking about the last 5 years. I've been talking about all the time. And does Borderlands 4 stutter? And right off the bat, what you'll notice when you get in the game on the Ryzen 7 9800X 3D, there was a shader pre-compilation step. It took around 2 minutes and 15 seconds, which isn't particularly long, I would say, especially in comparison to some other titles we've seen running on the same engine. And this is a large open world game with a lot of, I would say, unique shaders because they have a lot of just random weapons and like random effects you can do. There's like tons of different stasis type effects in the game and whatnot. So I was a little worried when I saw that. And then I got in game. And when you immediately get in game, I think one of the first things you actually see when you do get camera control is a shader compilation stutter. It's like, I don't know what causes it, obviously. But when you do play through, I played through, I would say the first 75 minutes of the game. And in the first 75 minutes, there are definitely a good number of them. And you'll definitely see what they coincide with. It's like the first time I shoot an enemy of a certain type, the first time a death animation plays, the first time a grenade type goes off. There's different types of grenades, obviously, in the game. A lot of the first time stuff, the first time you pick up a weapon and put it in your hand for a lot of the different types of weapons always triggers a shader comp stutter. It's like when you walk through the world, see some new thing for the first time, those all trigger shader compilation stutters. This was a little bit surprising to me because one, they have even in the first area, this happens with the first enemies you see. And I would have thought they would have included that in the pre-compilation step. Also, it was a little surprising to me because there's the first visual one you can see right before you start the game with a dedicated UI, but there's also another shader comp burn right when you get to the main playable area of the game after the introductory sequence. There's, as the cutscene is playing, there's this cinematic with claptrap, and you can totally see that it is doing shader compilation burn in the background because the frame times get super wonky and the CPU goes up to 99%. And that is a very telltale sign of shader compilation also being done. So there's at least two that are dedicated. And it's just weird to see them missing kind of super obvious stuff that you do in a first-person shooter, like shooting your guns and shooting enemies or seeing enemies. So I feel like they missed an opportunity here. And I do think it does make the experience feel less polished. Now, the shader times you're seeing there, the frame times you are seeing here, are on a 9800X 3D. Not everyone has that CPU. This will be easily half the length of your consumer CPU, like a 5600 for some of the size of these frame times. So they'll be much bigger on a lower end CPU, which I expect many people will have. Beyond that, another thing to point out is that there were kind of other, I would say the traversal stutters here were not as big as I've seen in other games. Like, for example, not as big as I've seen in Silent Hill 2. But they were still kind of peppered throughout the small little open world segment I did do. Another thing, when I'm showing off these videos that I sent to Oliver here, is that in the middle of combat, I've kind of crunched the frame time graph, consistency graph on the bottom right here to show up to 33 milliseconds, because what I wanted to show was usually you're kind of GPU limited. And that leads to a very nice and steady frame time. A little perturbations, but nothing at all big. But as soon as you get into combat, sometimes you'll see it like spike up momentarily momentarily to like 16 or 20 milliseconds, and it does it like all the time throughout a combat, and I'm really not sure what is causing that. But that to me shows something that is typically not a CPU limited behavior, but not a GPU limited behavior, but rather a CPU limited behavior. And I presume, I haven't tested on a lower end machine, but I presume this behavior, that when it does occur in combat, will lead to it looking quite a bit jerkier and less fluid on a lower end CPU. On a Ryzen 7 9800X3D, it was much more tolerable, of course, because, that's a really big CPU. The deviation in frame time wasn't as large as it could be otherwise, but that's kind of what I saw. So it wasn't a completely fluid experience, I would say, and I've definitely seen better. And I'm a little surprised to see some of that occurring. Some other stats to talk about too. I was running this on an RTX 5090. I pumped the settings up to whatever the epic equivalent is. I think they call them badass in this game. And it at DLSS 4 performance mode in your typical combat scenario was between 70 and 90 FPS 4K DLSS performance mode. That is admittedly pretty heavy for an RTX 5090. That is actually right within the realm of what you'd expect to play a path trace title. Usually, like, those lock pretty well to 60 FPS these days on an RTX 5090 most of the time. And they have, some headroom above that from 70 to 90. If you play Alan Wake 2, you can see that. So here it is very heavy on the highest settings, but this is probably one of those cases where, like, almost every single Unreal Engine 5 title, turning down some stuff just to the one below the highest notch is going to give you a broadly similar visual experience for much better performance. That's kind of how Epic has tuned the engine, and that's the way it looks. This is using Unreal Engine 5's top line features. It is using virtual shadow maps, presumably is using Nanite. I didn't investigate it so much, but if you're using VSMs and Software Lumen, you probably are using Nanite. And Software Lumen here is pretty obvious. Like, you get to any of the water in the game, and there's a lot of it. There's a lot of SSR in there, to say the least. And I guess one thing that I would point out is that thing that would maybe distract your eyes in the game a little bit is, yes, it is presumably using Nanite, but the vegetation in the game has this behavior where I would say after like 7 meters or so, it starts animating. So all the vegetation primarily in the distance is like static. And then as you get closer, it starts to animate, and it does like this very obvious flip when it does it. And it looks like an LOD is changing, except it like changes the position entirely of the vegetation for some reason. I have no idea why they did it this way. But when you're walking through the world and there's a lot of grass on the ground, you'll see a lot of what looks like pop-in occurring. And that's actually just the animation turning on. So that's one thing I noticed when playing the game. So if you do see pop-in, it's probably not pop-in in the traditional sense, but just kind of like the vegetation turning on to animate. It was a little weird looking. Other than that, some things that I really ought to talk about are the fact that all the cutscenes that are real-time are limited to 30 FPS, and which is a bit bizarre because you go from like super fluid in comparison normal animation, like here I was like in the 90s or 100 almost in one scene, then it just crashes to 30, and it seems a little out of place in a first-person game that has a surprise. Are
the cutscenes first person? That's still
the cutscenes are first person. There are some pre-rendered cutscenes as the game starts that introduce like the characters of the game, but all the cutscenes, yes, they were in first person so far.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah.
I think one thing that springs to mind for me, Alex, is looking at all of the stuttering issues that you've encountered. And I'll just sort of serve to highlight what you mentioned earlier is that, I'm seeing stuff that's like above 30, even 40 milliseconds on a 9800 X3D. That's really not good.
Yeah.
And so you've identified that there's stutter on the fastest gaming CPU that money can buy.
Right.
And obviously, if we had time, we would have brought in a 3600 and you would have seen like double the...
way more than double, probably. Maybe like 2.5 usually. So yeah, that's the thing to just mention that, like, I think taming the beast here will be relative. I think you're just not going to get rid of some of that stuff other than playing the game for longer. Some of this is definitely shader comp. So playing the game longer, presumably, and staying in the same area. I think as you go into new biomes, which the game definitely will have, it'll start reintroducing this stuff again, like the new enemies you see. The game has a vast array of enemies, like so many different types, and new gadgetry all the time. So I think it's going to be pervasive to a certain degree no matter what, which is a shame, especially like the traversal stuff. That is, like I said, smaller than in other titles, but I'm talking about this on a 9800X 3D, and I'm pretty sure not everyone has that CPU. So
Yeah, I mean, it's a far cry from what we actually saw at Gamescom in the NVIDIA booth, where it was just like a very small arena.
Yes,
that was presented as the demo, which basically meant, first of all, less potential stuttering issues, and secondly, by the time you'd have got to the workstation to play it, somebody else would have already played it and banked the stutters, they banked the compilations. So yeah, it kind of looked pretty good there, but it was very limited compared to what we're seeing just from the opening area of the game here.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, anything else to add, John? What do you think?
I mean, Alex started this conversation with, does it stutter? And I think the answer is yes. I was looking at people playing the game on PS5 Pro, captured at 4K 60, not the PC version. And what really caught my attention is that while the initial areas seem to run smoothly at 60, like once he's out in the open world and like fighting a lot of stuff, the frame rate just takes a giant dive. Like all the footage I'm seeing is like showing it in the 30s to 40s. Which I can very easily eyeball and see that. And it's like, so it seems like the performance gets a lot worse in this game as you go forward. I don't know if the consoles have modes though. Maybe they have modes. But
doesn't surprise me though. Like just looking at the frame times when I'm walking around on the 9800X 3D, there's CPU limited stuff occurring even though I'm like around 70 or 80 FPS. And I presume if you had a Zen 2 level CPU like they have in the consoles, that this is an area that would definitely be below 60. I would love to test that Ryzen 5 3600, but I've only had the evening on the night before, the morning of this recording of this video, as Rich would say. And but that is a shame. We'll have to see what I'm presuming this is something Tom's looking at. We're going to have to see what he shows there.
Yes. I'm eager to see his opinion on this as well. It should be interesting. I guess the bigger question for me, Alex, is, so I've played other Borderlands games. I actually quite liked Borderlands 2 in co-op, but something that Borderlands always failed at to me is that the core gunplay never felt good. And I was always of the opinion like, oh, okay, well, I mean, if you're going to do RPG style mechanics, there's going to be a sacrifice to that. But then Destiny came out, right? And for all its faults, the core gunplay in Destiny is sublime. And I don't expect Gearbox to match Bungie here. Let's not mince words, but it is possible to have excellent gunplay with reactive enemies and like really satisfying feeling weapons, and have this sort of variety and all these mechanics layered in. So does like Borderlands 4 feel noticeably better than prior entries in your estimation, based on your time with it so far?
I would say some things are better than prior entries, like the hand animation is quite a bit better than previous entries. The guns are hideous though, unfortunately. Sorry. So if you really like these guns, they're like cartoony tactical. They don't really fulfill like
old tactical. I know what you did there.
Like they don't fulfill some sort of specific visual niche. Actually, they do very look modern weapons in this transplanted into the sci-fi world typically, which is a bit odd looking. But in terms of random gameplay, while you're just shooting dudes, a lot of it is looking at the health bar, and that is kind of where, for me personally, Borderlands has always fallen apart. And it still has it here for sure, unless you're using one of the weapon types that is slow shooting but does a lot of damage, and then you care a little bit less about it, but then it's like already forcing you into a certain role niche in the game, like only heavy hitting weapons. I personally didn't think it felt very satisfying to play while I was playing it.
So I guess the other question is, one of my favorite things from Borderlands 2, I believe, is that it's featured physics integration. How do the physics in this game compare to the physics from Borderlands 2?
Well, it is a far cry from that, that's for sure. I think the physical objects you get in the game are, you can pick up random explosive canisters with your whip and throw them. And I once shot a piece of concrete and it fell apart. That was about it. The rest of the environment is pretty static, actually. Yeah.
Alex, it seems to me, having looked online, because a lot of people have basically posted the screenshot of the NVIDIA performance overlay showing like a 4060 running at low settings, just above 60 frames per second. I think 60 to 80 is the variance I've seen. And the overarching question that people are asking is like, does a game that look like this warrant the performance cost?
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, that's an interesting question, isn't it? Because there's kind of like, on the one side, Borderlands is well known for its kind of cell shaded look, which isn't exactly associated with like super top end rendering, right? But at the same time, it is using Lumen, it is using Nanite, it is using virtual shadow maps, which all come with a performance cost.
Yeah, I think John will definitely have something to say about this, but I'll say that this is more of like a holistic question of whether or not a title like this requires those technologies to drive its look. In some scenes in this game, Lumen did do a big lifting job. There's like this one section where you're going through an area that is only skylit primarily. The time of day doesn't really seem to move as much as I thought it would. It's a little bit bizarre, but like you're going through this one area and it's like only skylit, and it did have that look, but at the same, like that luminy look that we like. But at the same time, I almost felt like it was clashing a little bit with the outline shader. I think, like it is a strange mix of visuals in this game where some stuff has hyper realistic texturing and other stuff has like black lines drawn into the textures, and it is a little bit inconsistent as a result. And I think that gives people this like wonky appreciation of the game. It's really hard to say like, oh, this looks what it should be. And I think I'll have to look at it, maybe the lower end performance myself at some point in time, perhaps. But at least on the higher levels, I definitely don't think you should be turning this game up to badass or whatever. That's going to be pretty much this thing. It's, I would say it for almost any Unreal Engine game that Epic did not spec those high settings, especially Software Lumen. It is woefully inefficient on the Epic setting. Like it's not good to use at that setting. That's like really placebo level stuff usually. So I can't say so much for the low settings because I didn't touch them, but there's probably some middle ground there that'll give you a better visual experience.
Okay, I think the other thing to bear in mind is that if you are lowering your GPU ceiling or rather rising it by reducing settings, then that's going to make the CPU stuff you see even more apparent.
Mm-hmm. Definitely will.
Man. Mm-hmm. Man, no, the whole thing, like, have you actually seen, like, currently the Steam reviews are at, like, mostly negative right now?
Yeah.
And it seems to primarily be down to performance. So it seems like you're testing highlighted issues on a fairly high-end kind of setup, but there's lower end hardware.
The maximum.
Yes. So, which I missed which GPU you were using.
5090.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. Okay, yeah. So yes, you are at maximum and still having issues. Good Lord. Because like it seems like people are having a lot of bad times right now with this, and I would say there was this thing about, does the visual quality warrant the performance? And I feel like it's an unfair question normally, in the sense that because of what it's doing under the hood doesn't, the visual look is an artistic choice, right? Mm-hmm. We know technologies it's using, so it's clear why it might be more heavier than expected, because being sort of more of that cell shaded look doesn't mean it's not demanding, right? But this one does seem to be running worse than usual for an Unreal Engine 5 game, right? It is below where it seems like it should be, given how other games using this engine perform.
Yeah, CPU wise, that's the appreciation I get, and GPU wise on the max settings for sure. One thing to just really put into perspective is that Software Lumen, particularly, and VSMs, when they are maxed out, they are possibly heavier than their ray traced equivalents using hardware acceleration, because they're running on generic CUs trying to get certain performance. So, and they don't have the luxury then of having the high quality associated necessarily with those other techniques. Like a really good example is just like in the beginning of the game, like Software Lumen is pretty noisy in a couple areas. I wouldn't expect similar things for a hardware accelerated technique, but it's just kind of like comes with the territory of this game shipping with software only. So like, you will get some stuff that is not worth the visuals that you get on screen as a result of it using these kind of generic techniques that were developed for entirely different purposes, like to run on stuff that doesn't have hardware acceleration. So I don't know. I do think it could arguably look better for its performance if it used different techniques in general, but that's something the devs didn't spec.
Yeah, fair enough. Here's the thing, Alex. We were talking about the need to wait for the day one patch, but obviously all of the behaviors that you've kind of highlighted specifically would have been there for like months, all time.
Yeah.
It's a bit frustrating from our perspective that we don't have the time to look more deeply into the game before it came out.
Yeah.
Because part of our job is to highlight these issues, but also to potentially suggest solutions or mitigations that could actually improve the quality of the experience. And basically, by having just 75 minutes to look at the game, that's obviously we can find some stuff pretty quickly, but it's by far the definitive verdict, so to speak. And it's a bit frustrating, I think.
Yeah, it frustrates me too. So from what I heard, that it is technically the version that we got at the end is better in terms of this stuttering. That is what I've heard. I cannot A/B test that myself. I don't have access to that previous version. So that is a positive thing. But at the same time, I feel like it is a little bit telling that you do have a dedicated shader burn step, and you have multiple of them apparently, but you're still like missing the obvious stuff. Like, why should there still be a shader comp stutter in the first combat you do, like multiple of them? It just seems like really like priorities are wrong, if you know what I mean. Like, why even have that step in the first place if it's going to be missing all the obvious stuff? So that's kind of how I always feel about it.
Well, because if they didn't have the step at all, then imagine how bad it would be.
Yeah, it would be way worse. Yeah.
What was that? What was that game?
Callisto
that we
Protocol?
got? No. It was before that even, or maybe after. It was
Sackboy?
Like Immortals or something.
Immortals of Avian.
Was that Immortals of Avian, right? Where, and this was not. It didn't ship this way, but the initial build we got didn't have shader pre-compilation at all, and the wow.
Yeah, that
when there's no pre-compilation, like it's really interesting to see for a game that complex. Like, good Lord.
Yeah. I really think there has to be something done about shader compilation in Unreal still. This is presumably a later version of the engine, but it's obvious that the devs for some reason are still struggling to capture the ones that are actually relevant for gameplay. I don't know, like they could have easily made it a 10-minute long one and had this be a lot better, right? And I don't think anyone would be complaining, right? 10 minutes versus 2.
Randy might. I don't know.
It's a good point.